Hey, everybody, it's time for a draft roundtable. Eduardo, oh, you've changed into Paul Cheon. Hi, Paul. What's up? How's your morning been?
It was great. We actually just saw a fantastic match right at the end. Raf Levy going up against John Fingal. That was amazing. I mean, John just playing to his outs every single turn, desperately trying to find the way to win, and then, like, just one top deck short of basically coming back there. It was insane.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And Magic is a game where sometimes you don't know where to look, but that was one of the most exciting nothing happenings I think I've ever seen. Right? It's literally Raphael sitting and not doing anything other than the most important thing you can ever do in Magic, which is think.
Right.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, there were definitely these tough spots where Raf basically, you know, had he not played around something, right? Had he not played around something, he would have just won on the spot. But, you know, John is playing with 6 cards in hand, cycling through his deck. You know, he clearly probably has something. And, you know, Raf just trying to play it a little bit conservatively. And that almost ended up hurting him. He almost lost that game. But, you know, the timely astrolabe, the draw into the redraw into the settle is what allowed him to come back there.
All right, let's get to it. Our draft roundtable, where do we begin, Maria?
All right, well, let's take a look at our feature pod this morning and see who we're going to be looking at every pick, or excuse me, not every pick, but we're going to see the first 3 picks and then their final deck. We're going to kick things off with Marcio Carvalho, of course, a member of the MPL. So let's take a look at Marcio's first pack and see if you would do what he would do. I think you would, because his first pick was Winds of Abandon. You see it there, one of the best rares in the set. Let's move ahead to pick number 2 for Marcio and see what he chose here. Here's a look at the pack. What did he end up picking? Let's take a look. There it is, Rime Tender. Rime Tender, a card a lot of people like in a snow deck, but good, just solid on its own. Let's take a look at his third pick here, and it's, you know, there's a few he could choose from. Let's see what he takes. It ends up being Irregular Cohort here for Marcio. Let's take a look at his final deck and find out what he built. Blue-white. Paul, what do you make of Marcio's build?
I mean, it looks like he kind of he really wanted to cut off white after first picking that Winds of Abandon, and he ended up with a very aggressive white deck. We actually never got to see Winds of Abandon during the matches that he had, but yeah, it's a nice streamlined white aggressive deck. Doesn't really have all the tools that you'd like, and you know, kind of looking at this deck, I would kind of expect something like a 2-1 from this deck.
Ooh, well, you are right, Paul. He ended at 2-1.
All right, next round the table, let's take a look. It's going to be Guillaume Gauthier. So we'll take a look. His first pick, here it comes. And he's looking there, looking along. Well, I'm going to go for gold with Cloud Shredder Sliver. That's hard to say. All right, pick 2. Here are his options. And after that red-white card, it's going to be the Shinobi down there at the bottom. And then pick number 3. This is pretty straightforward. It doesn't do an awful lot, but it does what it does very sufficiently, thank you. It's a Magmatic Sinkhole. Let's take a look at the final Gautier deck, and it is going to be red-white. He thought there might be 2 red-white drafters. He was, in fact, the only one, but there were plenty of red players around the field. Paul.
Yeah, so one small issue I see with this deck is just the lack of actual solid 2-mana creatures. Right. You see those talismans that he has in play, and that makes a lot of sense because he's really glutted at the 4-mana slot. So, you know, I think he has a lot of powerful slivers, but given the fact that you can't really curve out ideally with this deck, I mean, this also looks like something like a 2-1 deck to me.
Yeah, it was 1 and 2 in the end. 1 and 2 for Gautier, which brings us on to player 3.
Let's go around the table yet again. This time we are going to Jared Calabrese. So let's take a look at his first pack and his first pick. There's a look at his pack, and what did he take? It's a card a lot of people like. Watcher for Tomorrow. Very strong 2-drop. Moving on to his second pick here. Well, it's going to be one that we've already seen. Magmatic Sinkhole is what he chooses. Let's move ahead to pick number 3. It's one of my favorite cards, and there it is. Conifer Worm. All right, well, those colors are a bit all over the place. Let's find out what he ended up with his deck. Take a look, Paul. This is a bit interesting. We've got a Lightning Skelemental in there, a couple of Unearths doing the Grixis thing. What do you think?
Yeah. So,
all right, that says it all.
This reminds me a lot of kind of the way Paul Rietzel's draft went, where it's like, you're kind of all over the place, and then you ultimately set it into blue-red. But I think blue-red, just as a color combination, is an archetype it's really difficult to support 2 players in a draft. And you kind of see this, and he had to get a little creative. Splash black for the Lightning Skelemental. I mean, fortunately, he had good mana fixing because he had 2 Prismatic Vistas in his deck. But yeah, it's not a deck that I would be exceptionally thrilled about playing.
No, and you would be very unexceptionally excited to see the 0-3 at the end of it.
Yeah, that's
the
rough.
Unearthed didn't get there. All right, number 4 around the table is going to be Wilson Mock, top 8 of a Mythic Championship this season. And let's take a look at his first pick here for you. Well, it's top left, and it is Mana War.
Mythic
Yes.
common.
Good Mythic, absolutely. So then from a Mythic common, how about, well, why don't we go with the rare slot? We'll go with Future Sight, and then pick number 3.
that pick two?
I can't quite see what he took here. Oh, it's my bad eyesight.
Oh,
so
boy.
You're welcome. So there we are. And his deck is, of course, blue-black. At pains to tell us that he wasn't trying to force the ninja archetype, but kind of fell into it. And you see a Venomous Chain.
I don't know. I feel like a third pick Ikite means you kind of leaning towards drafting ninjas. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Happy with this, Paul?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is, oftentimes ninjas is deep enough where there's going to be multiple players. I think he might have been one of the only ninja drafters at the table. And, you know, you have a nice curve, you have all those evasive creatures, and you have the payoff cards there with Fallen Shinobi and the Ingenious Infiltrator.
Yep, he went 2-1.
All right, well, let's continue our journey around our table of our feature pod here, and we're going to wind up with Samuel Marty. They're across the table from Marcio Carvalho. Let's take a look at his first pack. There it is. What would you take? Well,
Firebolt?
How about Winds of Abandon?
I did not see the Winds of Abandon.
Yeah, Winds of Abandon. 2 players in this pod, first picking that card, so Marty takes it. Let's take a look at his second pack that he gets passed here. There it is. What does he take? It turns out Genesis, also a very powerful card there. Great pickup for him. Let's move ahead to pick number 3 for Marty. What does he take? Well, he's going to follow that up with a Spring Bloom Druid, a card a lot of people like in multiple strategies. Let's take a look at his final deck, what he put together. Green-white, but we have a black splash in there for Rot Widow Pack, which is very powerful. A couple of Battle Screeches, very nice. What do you think, Paul?
I mean, I kind of like the way that this deck looks. Spring Bloom Druid is a little more awkward in this deck because generally in green-white you want to be a little more on the aggressive side, and the Spring Bloom Druid is kind of a slower card that you want in your 4 or 5 color control decks. So I think this deck has a lot of good cards, especially with those 2 Battle Screeches, but
Energy low?
yeah, but it just doesn't seem like this is exactly the type of thing that you want to be doing generally in a green-white deck.
All right, well, he ended up 1 and 2. 1 and 2.
All right, so Paul Rietzel is up next. Now, of course, we saw his full draft, so let's take a look at his first few picks for you. And it begins with very little text because it's a snow-covered forest.
This
There
was
we go.
wild.
I understand that card. I know what that does.
I love it.
Next, pick number 2. I think I understand this one as well. Firebolt. Ow. And then pick number 3 is Thundering Djinn. Thundering Djinn, obviously. So let's take a look at the final deck, which I can tell you that Paul Rietzel absolutely hated, Paul. Yeah, he went 3-0 with it.
boy.
Surprised? Does this just speak to the lack of excitement at the table all round?
Okay, I will say it's a couple of things. First of all, I think Paul just kind of downplayed his deck. I mean, if you look, he's got Firebolt, he's got 2 Mana Wars, Factor Fiction, double Ravenous Giant, I mean, and a decent curve. So it's one of those things, if the power level of your pod is relatively low, then I think this deck has what it takes to do well. But at the same time, it's not really kind of the ideal blue-red deck that you would imagine. The ideal blue-red deck is a deck that's looking to draw additional cards, use those synergies, much like what we saw from John Finkel's match against Raph Levy. That's the type of deck that you want, and since Paul didn't have that specifically, I think that's why he was a little disappointed with his deck.
Okay, on we go.
All right, let's go around the table yet again. This time we're going to be taking a look at Andrew Zigas. Andrew Zigas, there you see him on your graphic. Let's take a look at his Pack 1, Pick 1. It's a card a lot of people like, Sling Gang Lieutenant, and for good reason. Let's take a look at what he picked for pick number 2. A look at the pack there. He goes for a white card this time in Zalfirin Decoy. All right, interesting pick. Moving on, we're going back to black here with Venomous Changeling for his pick number 3. Let's take a look at what he ended up after the entire draft was done. Red, black, with an Ice Hide Golem. All right, what do you think of this deck?
This is really interesting. I'm very curious what his mana actually looks like.
Oh yeah, because he got 2 Etchings of the Chosen.
But you know, he's a Goblin deck, and Etchings of the Chosen is like the perfect card to splash in the Goblin deck because you just play it and you name Goblin. So this is a pretty cool looking, you know, Goblin deck. Again, mana is the big question here, but I think this deck looks fairly solid with all the Goblin parties and the Etchings. You know,
it has a plan.
It does have a plan. That Ice Hide Golem too is also something that's a little questionable to me. You need a lot of Snowlands to justify playing that card in your deck.
Well, he ended up going 1 and 2, so maybe the mana was a little bit rough.
Right.
Yeah. So then we get to Petr Danek. He's the last player round our table, the only Mythic Championship debutant at the top table, and he opened up. Let's see how how he began his draft. He began with Ranger Captain of Eos down there on the bottom left. Then it was time to go green with Spring Bloom Druid, and pick number 3 is going to be Winding Way. His deck eventually ends up looking like this, red-green, yeah, just no 4-drops at all. Lots of top end, lots of 2s, lots of 3s, and I can tell you that he ended up 2-1. So the big winner from the table was Paul Cheon. The big 0-3 was Jared Calabrese. And hopefully most of them will be back tomorrow to try it all again. And that was our draft roundtable.